You might remember us, the ones in the red shirts.
We can't afford guns being the leading cause of death for children and teens in this country.
Whether you're Republicans or Democrats, you can't look away.
We're not going to shut up until we get the change we deserve.
Thoughts and prayers are no longer enough. We need to take action now.
You didn't get this far by saying you can't. You didn't get this far by just being mediocre. You moms demand action, and that's what we demand.
Welcome to Movement Builders, a show about the people ending gun violence in America, all of us.
I'm Kaylin Ford.
And I'm Nikita McDaniel. Y'all, this year has been off to a heavy start. And before we begin this episode, we want to acknowledge the fear, grief, and pain that many of us are living with right now. We have folks in our movement worrying about whether their loved ones will be detained or deported. We have folks in our movement who are facing racism, transphobia, and hate where they work, live, study, and worship. And we also have folks in our movement who aren't able to access the health care that they need just because of who they are, and it's unacceptable.
Absolutely. And while we come together as a movement to do this work, we're all individual people whose lives and experiences and struggles matter. And so before we get into our conversation today, we want you to know that we see you and what you're experiencing. We feel that fear and anxiety too, and we are here for each other. We also know that our federal work to end gun violence has gotten a lot tougher since January 20th. But we are continuing to push for progress on gun safety, even as the Trump-Vance administration abolishes the White House Office of Gun Violence Prevention and goes out of their way to cater to the gun industry and gun extremists.
That's right, Kaylin. Guess what? We're going to keep speaking truth to power and organizing because the safety of our communities depends on it. This podcast is a way for us to keep holding space for each other, even while we hone our skills for the fight ahead.
And that's never been more important, Nikita, because our work to save lives keeps going no matter who's in the White House.
And there is so much that we can keep doing around the country, in our communities, and in the courts by changing the culture to fight back against the gun industry's reckless agenda. And today, we're all in luck because we've got two guests who have dedicated themselves to doing just that.
That's right. We're joined on this episode by Greg Lickenbrock, Associate Director of Investigations with the Everytown Support Fund. Greg runs The Smoking Gun, a website by the Everytown for Gun Safety Support Fund dedicated to exposing the gun industry's lies and reckless business practices. And we're so fortunate to have with us Drew Spiegel, a survivor of gun violence, Students Demand Action leader, and a student at Vanderbilt University in Tennessee, who has been leading the charge in our work to hold the gun industry accountable on the ground and in his community. Greg and Drew, welcome to the show. We are so excited to talk to you today.
Yes, we are. Welcome to the show. So, Drew, we'll start off with you. I know that you've been doing some amazing work in Tennessee, including recently even at the state capitol. Can you share a little bit with us about what brought you to this movement?
Yeah, well, hey, everybody. Thank you for having me, first of all. I'm so excited to be here with you guys and to talk to you all. What really brought me into this movement was I was at a mass shooting when I was 17 years old. It was my local community's 4th of July parade in Highland Park, Illinois. And I've grown up practicing for mass shootings, school shootings my entire life, but I was next in line to start walking in the parade, and you just hear the sound of bullets. It was 83 rounds of ammunition fired off in under 60 seconds, and you immediately, for me at least, think to yourself, like, this is a mass shooting. This is what I prepared for so long. And the entire experience itself really obviously drove me into advocacy and the work I do today. But the one thing especially that I took away from it was when the mass shooting happened, when the shots first went off, I was with some Gen Z friends, people my age who grew up practicing for mass shootings the way I did. And we immediately recognized, like, oh my God, like, this could be a mass shooting. I was a few blocks away, so I didn't see any of the carnage or the shooter himself, but we were able to hear it. So our first thoughts were, this is a shooting. But some of the older people around us, it was the 4th of July, they were like, that could just be fireworks. Somebody was like, that's the start of a 5K. They're firing off the starting gun, and now everybody running crazy. It's just a 5K coming through the streets. And I was like, it is shocking that like our generation hears it and immediately recognizes what it is. And it's because of the way we've grown up and been conditioned, and stuff like that really pushes me in my advocacy, and especially working with young people and fellow students who have grown up like this and don't want our children's generation to grow up like this.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Drew. And I'm so sorry that you and your community experienced that. Like you said, this has been the way that you grew up. This has been what you've practiced for. And why? So that someone else can make a lot of money off of selling weapons that really have no place in our community. Greg, I know that's a big part of what you talk about in your work, but tell us a little bit about what brought you to this movement.
Sure. Thank you again for having me. I joined Everytown in 2020. Before that, I worked in the gun industry for a decade. I was a magazine editor, so if the magazine competed with Guns and Ammo, I worked on it. I originally wanted to get a job in publishing, and that's kind of the job I fell into. I learned everything about guns. I got to meet so many people at different levels of the gun industry, and it really was just a job until the Newtown shooting. And I saw how the industry circled the wagons and decided to really get behind AR-15s and similar weapons instead of the people that were just killed. And they kept doing that after mass shooting, and they put forward all these other things. They'd let the NRA go distract people with this insane comment, or maybe it's mental health or whatever. At the same time, they wanted to keep selling these weapons that would cost them less than $100 to make, but they could sell them for over $1,000 on top of all the other accessories you have to sell to even use an AR-15. They really chose their profits over lives, and after a while, it just got to be too much. I sent an email to Everytown and I said, how can I help? Please let me help in some way. I have knowledge that might be useful to you, and I haven't looked back. I've been very excited to help Everytown every single day that I've been here.
That's amazing.
Wow. That's a very powerful story. Thank you for sharing it. And I'm also thinking about the alignment of our beliefs, right? And the things that we stand for. We're so thankful to have you, Greg. I want to talk more about the gun industry because they've been hiding for so long behind lobbyists that the public doesn't always know who they are and how the decisions that they make fuel gun violence. So, Greg, your Smoking Gun posts, they do just that. Tell us about who the main gun industry players are and what they're doing that harms our communities.
Sure. So we get that question a lot. We have people say, well, how is Honda responsible for a drunk driver killing someone in an accident, right? Mm-hmm. And that's really not the point here, because people don't really understand what the gun industry is doing to endanger their lives on a daily basis. So with the Smoking Gun, we're really focusing on gun makers, gun sellers, so the downstream dealers that allow guns to fall into the wrong hands. All of their enablers, so they work with marketing companies, things like that. They also have, as you mentioned, the gun lobby. So there are groups like the National Rifle Association, the National Shooting Sports Foundation, that's their trade association. They try to relax gun laws. They fight new gun laws. They're trying to get guns into as many places as possible. So we're trying to shine light on all of them so that people can see that every day they're making decisions that impact our lives, whether that's making military-style weapons and selling them to civilians and other dangerous weapons. They market them truly irresponsibly, whether they're trying to get guns into the hands of children or the next generation of customers as they see them. They try to put them in video games like Call of Duty. And then they continue to sell guns to gun dealers who just are not doing the job to vet their customers, to keep records of guns, because if a gun is stolen from a gun dealer, there's supposed to be a track record of where that gun was at all times. And too often gun dealers are simply dropping the ball, and law enforcement has no idea where that gun went or where it should have been.
I want to talk a little bit too about the AR-15, because I think that that's a really good example of what we're talking about in terms of marketing a very deadly weapon to civilians. And Greg, you said that you came to this movement after the shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, which is where I'm from. Drew, your community in Highland Park was also impacted by this. Talk about the fact that we have these assault weapons in our communities and how that's really endangering lives totally needlessly to make someone big money.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in the Highland Park shooting, it was a Smith & Wesson AR-15 styled gun that was, again, as I said, in under 60 seconds, able to fire 83 rounds of ammunition. 7 people were shot and killed. 48 more were injured. And
Awful.
It was nearly instantaneous. And that was a gun that there were limitations within Highland Park about ownership of assault weapons, but the shooter was able to get the gun through illegal means. And just by getting it in under a minute, he was able to cause so much destruction to our community. And that was, again, a single minute of a single day. And when you think about all the days and all the mass shootings and all the years that this has been going on, there's really just been like an unfathomable amount of damage to every single community in America.
Yeah, and I'll just say that, as I mentioned earlier, the profit potentials of AR-15s, right? So these guns were wildly unpopular for a long time. The AR-15 itself has been around since 1964. It was sold to civilians in 1964, and no one wanted it. Most gun owners were able to say, I don't need this military-style weapon.
Right.
After the federal assault weapons ban, you all of a sudden have the global war on terror, and the gun industry realizes they can use that to sell these guns. They can say, all those things you see being used in news clips, you see in movies and video games replicating the battlefield, you can have those here in the States. They're virtually the same guns. Here you go. And so they would target veterans with those guns. They would target teens, young adults with those guns. I saw it firsthand. All the things that people used to say they were inappropriate for, they would try to convince you otherwise. And it was, the term is wag the dog marketing, but that's exactly what it was. They knew they had to create the market. So you can't use it for hunting. You really can't. And they're like, here's our top hunter using it out in the field in this video. You shouldn't use it for home defense. Here are all of our social media influencers using it at home or in a vehicle. They did that in every possible way. And then I think in the Trump years, honestly, the gun has just become an identity for people. They see it as a rallying cry, and it's really hard to put that genie back in the bottle for gun owners. And I find that's what keeps me up at night, honestly.
And that toxic marketing that we've seen around masculinity and these weapons in particular, and marketing them to young men, you know, this is how you get your man card, or this is how you show that you're a man, is using these kinds of weapons, which unfortunately speaks to people's insecurities and young people who are susceptible to these kinds of ads.
Yeah, it's truly unfortunate. I think to be a bigger man, you should be able to look at that gun and say, I will never need that.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, and I'll say, as like a young person who probably spends too much time scrolling, especially in the lead up to the election, like on my Instagram reels, I would see a lot of these like gun influencers. And even if they don't directly have the gun manufacturer on their video, you can tell that they're trying to sell this product to you, and it's subliminal often. And again, they like try to tie in with masculinity and the military and police. And it's manipulative. And I see people my age, especially young men my age, who look at this content and they don't see it as like inherently political. They just see it as a man talking to them about how cool guns are. And, you know, it's hard to blame them sometimes, because without like proper information, like, yeah, it seems like it's just a person, you know, sitting on a podcast desk with a bunch of other dudes talking about how cool their big guns are, and, you know, talking about guns that you don't need to hunt certain animals, but they're using them anyways. And you're like, okay, if I don't know any better, then I probably should just trust them. It's sad.
Yeah, that perfectly leads me to our next question, which is the Everytown Support Fund recently launched our Are You Good With That campaign that exposes the gun industry for who they really are and uses a kind of provocative style that's meant to really speak to Gen Z. The campaign features 3 main characters: the greedy gunmaker, the tricky marketer, and the rogue seller. And we hear them on a fictitious Zoom call after a mass shooting. Take a listen.
Big shootings mean big money, so let's make this quick. Leslie, what's the latest with marketing?
Unfortunately, the latest shooting has gun reform trending again.
Again with this. Where's our DC prick, Tony?
He has a tea time with some senators that should seal the deal. But he, of course, sends his thoughts and prayers.
Good. I want them buttered up, and I want them on strings. The amount of money that I give these people, I want to see persuasion, not legislation. I don't want them messing with our sales.
And you can watch the full video at areyogoodwiththat.com. Greg, I mean, how does this campaign help get people to think differently about the gun industry?
So I think a lot of people already fall into two camps when they think about guns. This campaign, the idea was to use dark humor to kind of change the conversation a little bit and also parodize what's going on in the gun industry on a day-to-day basis in a way that's really easy for people to pick up and maybe see through it a little bit. It is funny. It's also disgusting at the same time. So I think it provokes a reaction from people. But it's important to note that virtually everything in the campaign is based on fact. So there are gun makers who have gone on record saying that mass shootings were great for their bottom line. There are marketing companies that have talked about their ways to get children into the gun industry. Everything you see is based on fact. It's just presented in a parody that's supposed to be funny and things like that, just to drive some engagement and get people talking about it.
Wow. That's powerful. That's a way to fight back. I know, Drew, for you, you've confronted some of these companies on the ground. Can you tell us a little bit about the SHOT Show and actually being at the headquarters of Smith & Wesson in Tennessee to call those businesses out directly?
Yeah, so calling out Smith & Wesson, they opened up their new headquarters in Maryville, Tennessee. I go to school in Nashville. This is about 2 to 3 hours east of me. And it's a small town that's pretty unsuspecting. Smith & Wesson, they used to be located in Massachusetts. Massachusetts passed common sense laws. They panicked. They moved to Tennessee, where sadly we have a supermajority in our state legislature. So I went to Maryville with a group of my fellow student demand activists, and we led a press conference and march in Maryville. And I had two main takeaways from this. And the first was that in a small town in Tennessee, one that a lot of people would assume is pretty conservative, votes pretty Republican, there was a huge amount of resistance we saw to them putting this headquarters there. And that's because it's not political to people. People don't want a gun manufacturer coming into its community. And a lot of the people who were at the protest, a lot of people I talked to were gun owners. And they grew up in rural Tennessee where for a lot of them guns were a part of the culture. And they were still able to understand that the gun industry is not the entire existence of guns in America. It is very focused on profits and not very focused on people. And then my second realization was kind of along those lines. And that's that when you hear people talking about big pharma, you hear big oil, big tech. And what I learned in Maryville, Tennessee, is that there is like absolutely a big gun, which is a term I made up. But big gun is just as slimy and gross and manipulative as all the other big industry is. Smith & Wesson would not let us near their headquarters. We couldn't even drive past it. We couldn't drive onto their street. They blocked everything off. They were very actively working against us and very actively did not want us to see what was going on inside the headquarters. To the point where the closest we got, and this is something that really stuck with me, was we were driving around after the press conference and we stopped at an elementary school where you could hear the sound of people, of the shooting range at the headquarters. And I just thought to myself, like, there are elementary schoolers who are going to grow up hearing the sound of gunshots from their classrooms every single day. And that's just no way to grow up.
Unacceptable.
Horrifying. And I know, Nikita, you asked about SHOT Show, but both of you have gone to SHOT Show in different capacities. SHOT Show, for those who are listening, is the gun industry's main trade show where they debut new products and kind of party and celebrate in Las Vegas. And both Drew and Greg have been on the ground there. Tell us a little bit about what that's like and what each of you were doing there.
Yeah, so my experience is like SHOT Show is big gun going all out. I went a few years into, I think, every town kind of getting ourselves involved. So they were a little more prepared for us. We had the permit to do our press conference in front of the Las Vegas sign where the conference is located. And the day before, they just pulled the permit suddenly. So then we had to move the location last minute. And then you could tell that we were very strictly not allowed into the premises of the event. It's a closed door event. And for good reason, they don't want you seeing what's going on in there because, and I'm sure Greg can speak to this more, but they were advertising some of the worst gun inventions you've probably ever heard of. They had the JR-15 to play on AR-15, but for kids. Which, they're not even trying to hide the fact that they're marketing assault weapons to children.
Yes.
I just was listening, into the extremes that they went to make sure that that's how you know your power. Y'all got motion, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. I was like, I'm just going to talk about my experience of going to my local 4th of July parade. And you guys are so determined to not let me do that, which just made us want to do it even more.
That's right.
But there's so much of this industry, the gun industry, that is so secretive and it's so dark and slimy is the word that I always come back to.
Slimy is the perfect word. Yeah.
Slimy and gross. But, we got our message through. So I'm super proud of that.
I'm proud of that too.
Yeah, I'll just add that I used to go to SHOT Show every year when I was in the industry. It was the worst week of my life. So yeah, it's thousands of gun makers, gun dealers, all of the wholesalers that help get products from point A to point B. They all go to Las Vegas. They fill out 2 convention centers now. It's something like 14 miles of aisles, they like to say, for the amount of products on display. And there is no distinction between military weapons for some of the customers that are there and civilian weapons. So there will be machine guns on bipods with sandbags around them right next to an AR-15 that they're going to sell to the family down the street. There's no difference, and that was a change I saw happen over time as I was in the industry. They used to separate those things, not anymore. But you wouldn't know from being inside the show, from going to the nightclubs where companies host parties, that the country's worst mass shooting was 2 miles down the road. You wouldn't know it. Half of the products that were recovered in that shooting were debuted there at the SHOT Show. And there's not a single thing, there's nothing demarcating that in the show. You would never see, if you didn't know about that mass shooting, you would never know it just walking the aisles of that show. It is business as usual for gun makers, and they're there to show off their new products and show off how their successes from the past year. So they have giant booths, they're spending money because they can basically print it these days.
The industry accountability work that we do, Greg, to your point, isn't just about responding to mass shootings or shootings that make the news. And there's a racial justice component, I think, to this, because the industry is largely led by white men making a lot of money, and the disproportionate impact of gun violence is actually being felt by communities of color, particularly Black Americans. So can you both talk a little bit about why you see this as a racial justice issue and how we can use this to sort of address some of those inequities that are happening between who's profiting from it and who's feeling the pain from it?
Yeah, I'll speak to it a little. So speaking from my work in Tennessee, there's been 2 particularly high-profile school shootings here in the past few years. And the first was at the Covenant School. And that's a school that's largely white. It's a private school. It's a Christian private school. It's a very wealthy school. And then just a few weeks ago, there was a shooting in Antioch. And that's a much more diverse school, a school that's a lot, on average, less wealthy. And it's just a much different community, a lot more immigrants, a lot more diverse. And, Covenant did have more people die in it, and sadly, you need a certain amount of deaths to get media attention for a school shooting, because that's the state of the world right now. Right. But I think race absolutely has a role to play in it. And for a lot of these shootings in predominantly Black and brown communities, there is a very obvious attempt to just try to brush it away and label it just a general crime problem, or just try to paint it as anything but a gun violence epidemic. So I think, what you're talking about is absolutely correct, in that we shouldn't have to wait for the gun violence to come into white communities for us to start caring about it. there should never be a school shooting that doesn't outrage us. And it was similar in Chicago with Highland Park is a wealthy white suburb. But the gun violence that goes on every single day in a lot of neighborhoods in Chicago deserves the same sort of attention. And we should be continually fighting to have awareness about gun violence in all of its forms.
Yeah, I'll add that the gun industry has really celebrated the past few years. There was a surge in sales during the pandemic. Studies are showing that it's not just white people buying guns anymore. And they keep boasting about that. They're saying there's more diversity in gun ownership. There are more black and brown people. There are more women joining the ranks of gun owners. And then you look at the executives behind these companies. They're all white. They're 99% male. Again, there's a huge disconnect between what's at the top and the people that are at the bottom buying these guns. And I find it just incredibly insulting that the gun industry keeps talking about it like they're here for everyone when they're really not. If they were, they would care about gun violence. They would care about how people are impacted. They wouldn't have a trade show so close to the site of the worst mass shooting in U.S. history, but they don't think about things like that. And also, I think there's an aspect of, as the gun industry has pushed more weapons and more military-style weapons and made it easier for people to fire more shots faster than ever, you see that people buy more of those guns. Police then have to respond with their own weapons, and there's kind of a virtual arms race of more people buying more guns that can do more damage. As long as people are carrying things like AR-15s, you're going to see police dressed up like soldiers, and there's going to be this constant battle of over-policing and a huge, huge effect on non-white populations. It's truly tragic to see it, but as someone who's kind of followed the history of this for decades now, it's inevitable, and it really comes back to the decisions that these men in boardrooms make on a daily basis. And so that's one reason that we have the smoking gun. We try to expose them in these situations where they're really celebrating sales and they're not thinking about the downstream consequences of those sales.
Oh, but we are. As you both were speaking, it made me think about a quote from one of my favorite community organizers, Isla Watson, that says, "If you have come to help me, you are wasting your time. But if our liberation is connected, then let us begin to work together." And I can't speak for all Black women or all Black people, because I'm just one. I'm also one that's deeply rooted in my community.
Yes.
I think that having these conversations in our community and understanding that sometimes the messaging, like we focus on the messaging for like all of these different audiences, we're going to have to figure out how to have the conversations and get the messages to the people and trust that they're going to do what they need to do with that messaging.
Yes.
And it's a part of that we may be able to help control. And then it's a part of that that's the business of the neighborhood. And so I feel like we as an organization have the ability and the resources, especially the brilliance to do that. And then there are going to be more people to join our movement, because guess why? We're pissed off about it too. You know, when I first learned about all of this stuff, it blew my mind. Mm-hmm. It made me feel like somebody was laughing at people and benefiting from the pain that happens in our communities. And if I were to hear the story told as it's told by you all, if that was how our leaders learned how to tell that story, it's going to create that same effect. It's going to be more far-reaching, and our movement will continue to grow.
Wow. And unfortunately, the gun industry, once again, has a friend in the White House. They have the Trump-Vance administration, who has made it clear that gun extremists are welcome among their movement, their ranks. So we know that our work, Drew's work, all of our work to hold these companies accountable is going to be more important than ever. Greg, what have we seen so far when it comes to the Trump-Vance administration and the gun industry and the kind of relationship that they have with each other?
Yeah, there's a lot of chaos right now, to put that very bluntly, but the gun industry has kind of telegraphed already what they're looking for. The last time Trump was in office, gun sales dropped, and that's because gun owners generally don't stockpile weapons when they have no fear of their guns being taken away or anything like that. So that's going to be the case again. But the industry is actively working to make sure that they can boost sales in other ways, and that's usually through relaxing regulations. They want to seriously either get rid of or defund the ATF, which keeps the industry in check and creates a lot of regulations that dealers have to follow, that gun makers have to follow. They want to significantly shrink the agency so that they can't provide proper oversight. And the last time we saw this under the previous Trump administration, that's when you saw ghost guns take off. That's when you saw gun makers come out with things like arm braces. Bump stocks really took off under that administration. They want to make sure there's no enforcer watching the rules and keeping an eye on these people. At the same time, they want to deregulate silencers in particular. That's a big one. Those have been highly regulated since 1934 because they make it hard for someone to hear a gunshot, recognize it's a gunshot. We saw that just recently with the assassination of the United Healthcare CEO. That involved a silencer, and yet gun makers and the gun industry want to remove the regulatory burden that it takes to own one of these things so that everyone can own them. They try to say that they protect your hearing, but in the end, they can be used in things like assassinations. Congress saw that back in 1934. There's no difference today. The devices work the same exact way. And the reason they're not used in crimes as often as they are is because of the regulations we have in place. You've also seen some reports that the gun industry wants concealed carry reciprocity. So they want more people carrying more guns everywhere. That really only benefits one thing, and that's the gun industry. It doesn't help anyone else. We know from data that the more people you have carrying guns, the more likely they are to use the guns, and especially misuse the guns. But the gun industry, since really the late 80s, as they've worked with the NRA to relax our concealed carry regulations and make it easier for people to carry guns out in public. First, it was concealed carry with a permit. Then over time, it became concealed carry without a permit. And then the concealed carry reciprocity bills that we see today would allow anyone with a permit to carry it to any other state. Or if you live in a state that doesn't require a permit, you're still allowed to carry that gun outside of your state as well. I don't see how that could benefit anyone but the gun industry. So those are some of the priorities that we've seen. We'll keep an eye on it and see if they're going to actually get any of that done. But that is certainly something they're looking to do.
And there are some cozy ties, right? But briefly, Greg, tell us who the NSSF is.
So the National Shooting Sports Foundation is the trade association of the gun industry. They're the voice of the gun industry. They're the ones that put out marketing materials to help their members, gun makers and gun sellers, sell products more. They do a lot of lobbying federally and on the state level. They like to fight any efforts to enact new gun laws, even small things like saying gun dealers should have to lock up their guns at night. When states pass laws like that, they will be there testifying that, no, that places a huge burden on gun dealers, which doesn't make a ton of sense, but that's what they argue for. So they're very pervasive. They're very powerful. A lot of people don't know about them because they're the people in the room with congressmen and women talking about these things. They're considered the sane ones when it comes to negotiations. They're not quite as out there as the National Rifle Association, but their priorities are the same.
That just filled me up with some righteous anger. And I'm pretty sure that we all have felt that in this movement, especially being here since 2012 and having personal stories about gun violence that happened to me and my family. Drew, I just got to tell you, your outspokenness about the industry's greed and recklessness and how it impacts our young people is commendable. I really thank you for that. I mean, we already know, right, that guns are the #1 killer of American youth. So can you talk a little bit about how young leaders like you are leading the way in this fight?
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I think that young people are the most invaluable part of this movement in many ways because we are the ones who've had to grow up like this. And I talk to a lot of people at college who are not involved in this movement, but they can tell you about Sandy Hook, and they can tell you about Parkland, and they can probably tell you about a shooting, whether it was a mass shooting or just a homicide or maybe even like a suicide that happened in their own community. I go to school, as I mentioned, in Tennessee, so the gun lobby is very closely intertwined with the legislature and influences a lot of the bills that they write. And the legislatures has turned down extreme risk protection orders. They've rejected safe storage laws or expanding background checks. All of that they just won't even consider, which has been frustrating. But what they have done is they decided that at the behest of the gun lobby, they wanted to arm teachers and try to put more guns in school. And I think it's just like a testament to the fact that the gun industry truly only cares about money, because more guns in schools means more sales. There's how many classrooms in a school, how many schools in a state, how many states in the country. That's a lot of money for them. So they're pushed for it super hard. And in Tennessee right now, people who are pushing for common sense gun reform, to be completely honest, we do not have a whole lot of power. But what young people can do is we can organize. I was at the state capitol, and there were so many young people there, so many of them who, this was a big rally for Antioch following the shooting there. And these young people are fed up and angry, and a lot of them might not be like super aware in the news, but they know about the gun violence epidemic because of what's happened to them in their personal lives. And I talked to so many people at that rally who are truly fed up and who plan to keep on showing up. And I think that in a state like Tennessee, but even as we're seeing nationally, this is not going to be a quick fight or something that happens overnight. But the thing about young people is that we're young, so we still have time. And this is something that I think as a generation, collectively, we're going to have to keep chipping away at for the next few decades. But then I truly do believe that we will be able to see the change that we aspire to see in our lifetime. So, young people, we're in it for the long run.
And Miss Nikita got your back.
Thank you. And
whatever barriers I can remove, whatever I can get you for your resources, I'm going to make sure you have it. We got your back.
And it is worth mentioning that the young people really couldn't do it without the support of a lot of the older people, because for every student we have coming to Antioch, we have the nicest moms ever coming and bringing us baked treats to eat while we're talking to lawmakers all day. So, we need everybody.
We need everybody. I always say, though, I am on the train of young folks. I joined this movement as a volunteer leader in 2014. That was a while ago. I aged, right? I still have some wisdom to impart. I feel like my role, though, is to make sure I'm paving the way, like somebody paved the way for me. And so it is really important that in this intergenerational organizing that we're doing, that we acknowledge that. And next time you're out somewhere, let me know. Maybe I could show up with some cookies, too.
Oh, I would love that.
Tennessee, when I was an organizing manager, it was one of the first states when I became staff that I worked in. So definitely a tough state. And also I've seen progress and I've seen us moving backwards, but we keep fighting and we're going to win because we're fighting.
Absolutely.
The good fight. And we're fighting the good fight strategically. Everything that we do, we're doing for a reason. And I'm going to just be honest with y'all. Like I'm really big on self-care. Mm-hmm. I'm really big on collective care. I'm aware that this work can take its toll on us. I mean, we're out here making sure that the gun extremists are being exposed for the things that they do, and they throw rocks and hide their hands. Mm-hmm. That's heavy work, y'all.
Yes.
So I don't know if y'all were expecting this, but Miss Nikita gonna be like, what are you doing to take care of yourselves? We'll start with you, Drew, and then we'll pass it over to Greg.
Awesome. So I feel like, self-care, it definitely gets difficult, especially I'm also a student, so I have to balance this kind of work with also my academic work. But I really try to use the free time that I have to relax and decompress. One of the main things I do is I've been long distance running. I was a cross-country and track runner in high school. And I've tried to keep up it in college. I wish I could run every day like I did in high school, but a lot of times it gets tricky and busy. But I try to run often. When I want to just be more chill, I love doing like crosswords and just hanging out, watching TV, reading books, and then hanging out with friends and getting my mind off of it. And just being a normal college student is always a great way to just decompress and relax.
I love all of that. Are you a pen and paper crossword puzzle person? Are you a Wordle person?
I'm completely online.
All right.
And my parents do crosswords and they like to print it out usually. So I think it's a generational thing. But yeah, every single day I do New York Times crossword. I couldn't imagine what my day would be without it.
We were pretty pumped because Moms Demand Action was actually in the New York Times crossword a couple months ago.
I noticed that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I did the crossword that day. So
That's awesome. That's awesome. What about you, Greg?
So I live and breathe this work. I feel like even when I log off at the end of the day, I'm still thinking about it. I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do the next day to shed more light on the gun industry and its problems. But not to copy Drew, I did get into running. I don't think I'm built for it in any way. I've never said I'm a runner. I'm trying, though. I'm sure if somebody saw me on the street, they'd think I was walking. But I'm trying. And also, I just love... My wife has got a very good habit of finding things for me to do that are not related to this.
Yes.
And so she's like, here's this fantasy book, Crown of Thorns and Roses. Would you like to try it? And I gave it a try. And then all of a sudden, I'm 3 books deep in it.
Yeah.
And I'm a book talk girly now, apparently. But yeah, I'm just really grateful for her and others like her that just help pull me out of it a little bit. And these students, volunteers, survivors that just refresh me every day. So I'm like ready to get back out there because it's just inspiring.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that with us. We asked that question because I think that sometimes we think of self-care as frivolous or like a nice to have, but not necessary, right? And Drew, to your point, this is going to take decades. And all of us came to this movement for a different reason. All of us have other people that we love, that we take care of, children, parents, pets, whatever, that we have to show up for as well, friends, family. So we have to protect ourselves so that we can keep doing it. It's not frivolous. It's not silly. It really is important to kind of be able to keep going. What's one thing that's giving both of you hope right now?
I mean, for me, I think it just has to be what I saw at the rally for Antioch at the Tennessee State Capitol. And in that, I mean like a massive multiracial, multi-generational coalition of people from all sorts of different backgrounds coming together to demand change from the state legislature. To see young people who maybe have not been part of the movement for so long come to the Capitol. I feel like recently, especially post-2024, there's been a lot of questions about Gen Z politically and where we're heading and what it means. But I think specifically with the issue of gun violence prevention, we grew up with it and we're mad and we're tired of it. And
yes,
I think that how we translate that specifically politically in terms of building power and votes is a whole different conversation. But what we really need first and foremost is for people to be mad about it. And seeing so many people upset that we have to live this way was a reminder that, you know, it's been tough recently in Tennessee and nationally, but we have the seeds of our movement and we just need to give them time to grow.
Mm-hmm. Wow. What about you, Greg?
I work with so many teams at every town. I try to make sure everyone has the best information they have about guns, the gun industry, things like the ATF. But when I see all of these amazing people working together and getting something across the finish line, I'm just ecstatic. Even if it's the smallest, it feels like a small bill or policy or something that if it changes one person's life, I'm all for it. I recently had the chance to go testify in Colorado about a bill that they're moving through the legislature there to regulate many semi-automatic weapons. It's really innovative. It's really cool. I was excited to testify about it. I got to meet so many Moms Demand and Students Demand volunteers that were there, speak with them. And I got to meet a lot of state representatives who were just, they had never thought that we had people like this on our side. They hear from the gun enthusiasts and people who go way too far with guns. They hear a lot from them. And it was just, they were so excited to hear from us and have a conversation with us. And I think it really was it was restoring to my soul to be around those people and speak my truth in front of representatives. And I'm really optimistic about that bill, and it's giving me hope. And I think it can be a model for many other states to follow.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
Y'all are giving me hope.
Me
Y'all are
too.
giving me hope. We just want to thank you all, Greg and Drew, for being here on the show today and sharing your stories. And also, we asked you about the hope question, but we also want to make sure we give you an opportunity to add anything that you feel like is important for our volunteer and supporter base to know.
I assume a lot of listeners are already super involved with the movement, but send this to somebody who may not be as involved. And if you're that not as involved person listening, then get yourself out there. The gun industry's dream is for after a mass shooting like Antioch, which just happened a few weeks ago, we all just move on and forget about it. And their nightmare is when we're out there at the state legislature for the weeks and months to come, continually reminding lawmakers of it and demanding action. They want to be secretive. They want to work in the dark. And every single person we have who is willing to speak out and shine a light on them helps our movement and moves us forward. Get everybody you know involved. Have them join Student Statement Action. They can go to my Instagram, DM me, just really however you want to get involved, just go for it.
You're going to get a bunch of people sliding into your DMs after this podcast. I got to tell you.
Great. No, genuinely, because I say that because I've had so many young people who maybe saw an Instagram reel of me or something, and they see the issue, but they don't really know how to get involved. They don't even understand that this is such a political issue. And I talked to them about Student Statement Action, or we're all going to the Capitol to protest this day, and they're super excited and they're super thrilled. And the issue is not that they didn't care, it was just that they didn't know about it. So if you have people in your life who you can tell care about this issue, but just don't know that we have this awesome movement that we're building, get them involved.
Thank you. That was beautiful.
I'll just say, when I worked in the gun industry, speaking out against it was impossible. If you did, you lost your job immediately. You were reassigned. I saw several people say things like, people don't actually need AR-15s. And then all of a sudden they'd find themselves without a job. Now I'm on the other side of it and I get to speak out and I'm happy to. I hope others follow suit. I hope others see that they can do it without reprisal. They can find comfort in speaking truth, because I knew people in the industry who also agreed that we shouldn't be selling AR-15s to people. The people at the top that are making all the money, they're not true believers. They just care about the money. I knew several gun executives who were excited to vote for Barack Obama for president because they knew he would keep sales up. They don't care about the Second Amendment or rights or things like that. You wouldn't see them caught dead at a gun show talking to gun owners. They like to hide in the shadows. And as Drew mentioned, the best thing would be for no one to talk about them on a daily basis. And it's really unfortunate that news and media only seem to care when there's a high-profile shooting.
Yes.
And then a week later, it's gone. And all of those survivors, everything, they become part of things in the past. And that's really unfortunate. And I try to hold on to that every day. And it's not easy, but that's part of the Smoking Gun. We're trying to build on this history of how the gun industry is affecting you on a daily basis. And it really, I think if people understood how much it affects them daily, they wouldn't put up with it for much longer. So that's something that keeps me going.
Yes. So I just want to thank y'all for the work you do. I'm fortunate to work with y'all.
Well, thank you so much, for having us and letting me speak a little.
I love y'all.
Thank you both so much for joining us. We really feel privileged to be having this conversation with you. And the world is a crazy place right now. Drew, I can't wait to vote for you when you run for office someday. You got my vote. I'm waiting. Could be 30 years from now. I'll remember.
It would maybe more than that.
Whatever you do next.
We'll see. Yeah.
I'm here for it. What you're doing now is so powerful. And I wish that I, as a college student, understood the way things are, the way that you do. And we're really fortunate to have your leadership. So thank you. And thank you, Greg, for being here. Thank you for quitting your job to come work here.
Forever thankful.
Of course.
If it's one thing that I'm taking away from this episode, it is that we are definitely not going to allow them to hide in the shadows anymore. Our movement is exposing it. We're going to keep growing and adding other people, and we're going to keep talking about it.
Yes, we know that sunlight is the best disinfectant, and we're confronting the gun industry every way and everywhere we can with people like Drew and Greg. So if you haven't already, check out smokinggun.org to learn more and share it with your fellow volunteers. There are so many great resources there to work from and learn from, and it's constantly being updated.
Thank you all for listening and for the messages you've sent us so far this year. Here's what you had to say.
Hey everybody, this is Stephanie here on the Students Demand Action team, and I just want to send out a shout out to all of our amazing students in New Mexico and in Colorado who've been making a huge impact at their state capitals recently. I know that 2025 is off to an amazing start. Let's go students, woohoo!
Hey, it's Megan here on the Demand a Seat team, and I just wanted to say I loved the episodes with Demand a Seat alums, including Anna Albee, Chantel Rock, and Roja Henson. It's been super inspiring to hear their stories, and we hope more of you movement builders take the leap and run for office. We're here to support you.
And remember, we love to hear from you, so please keep sending us your thoughts, feedback, and stories to movementbuilders@everytown.org. Again, it's movementbuilders@everytown.org. And don't forget to share this podcast with your fellow volunteer leaders and team members. Thanks for listening to Movement Builders. I'm Kaylin.
And I'm Nikita. Thank you all for what you're doing to save lives. It's working.